coming through okay? Can you hear us?
Yep, we can hear you loud and clear.
All right. Perfect. Well, thank you very much. I'm coming from Atlanta today, where I'm with some of the North America's greatest folks involved with imaging and scanners, and here by invitation of Kodak Alaris. So my heart goes out to you. We've had a number of folks from the Northeast that haven't or are just now getting in. So I hope that the weather's not too bad, and we thank you for joining us today. Today's topic is so much fun, I just can't hardly stand it. If you have got a scanner and you are doing photographs or documents, you're going to get a neat little break today, because we're going to talk about the world of scannography. This is the bridge between using the science of scanning, like the types of things I'm learning about at this conference, and adding the creativity of art. It's a fantastic tool. I don't know if you've ever been involved with scannography before, but you're going to have a lot of fun. I've scattered a whole presentation with all sorts of different kinds of scanograms, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. So you can kind of see it gets fun here, and this is Bob Creamer, and he's setting up. He actually has done a number of things for the National Museum of Natural History, and that's part of the Smithsonian, and here he is doing some of his scanograms, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a few minutes. I was just totally blown away when I found out about this topic. It is all about taking the technologies that we kind of have just sitting laying around in many instances, not doing a lot, and turning them into creative types of things. And the fun part about it is you don't have to really be an art buff to get some really good work. So we're going to be telling you a little bit more about that and sharing with you all sorts of interesting facts about scanography and how you can use it. Again, if you have any questions, please put them in the question box, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So why this topic of scanography? Why is Easy Photo Scan putting that in their webinar series? Well, I did a search about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, and this is just a couple of things that I found that popped up. It actually kind of created from the Orlando Camera Club. This is actually in our hometown, or we're in just a few miles outside of Orlando, and this caught my eye. It was a presentation on scanography. And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. Unfortunately, I had a conflict with that particular meeting, but I said, scanography, how interesting, what's going on? So I limited it to just a search that had been happening in the month, and I found that there was a scanography workshop going on, that there was this lecture going on, that there were calls of entry for an art exhibit in Denver going on about scanography, as well as scanography had made the top 100 ideas for creative photographs in 2017. And I'm like, whoa, we've got to have a topic on this and share a little bit more about it, because it is so much fun. So a lot of people have their hands all wrapped up in the world of scanography, and we're going to take a few minutes and dive into it as well. So let's get started. First of all, we need to probably ask the question, what is scanography? And scanography is, and you can spell it with one N or two N's, it's more commonly referred to as scanner photography, because if you think about it, your scanner is like a camera, and it's the process of capturing digitized images of objects for the purpose of creating printable art using a scanner. Now, although it's theoretically possible, and I've seen all sorts of different types of scanograms and getting ready for this presentation to execute the process of scanography with all sorts of different scanners. I've seen them with the automatic document scanners. I've seen them with the overhead scanners that have the cameras attached to them. I've seen them to large, big flatbed scanners that are the size of a dining room table. I also saw imagery of a scanogram being created using wide format on a whole bolt of cloth. You get some repetitive imagery. We're going to refine our conversation today just down to flatbeds and flatbed scanners because they're inexpensive to access. They're cheap. You can always get a used one if you don't want to mess up your really good photo scanners and your good flatbed scanners. So that's what we're going to work on today, is about flatbed scanning, and we'll reserve those other types of scanners and scannography for some other different presentation. So what's a scanogram? That's one right there. This is actually red glass that has been placed on the scanner and digitized, and you can see, and there'll be a whole bunch of things we'll talk about this, and you'll be able to, once you get done with this presentation, your eye is going to help you understand a little bit more about why scannography may actually work. And in fact, at the end, I'm going to give you 5 really good business opportunities where you can take the knowledge of what you've got with your scanner and the knowledge of dealing with photographs and imagery and convert it into an income stream. No joke. I was surprised too. So let's move on, and we again talk about scannography as these are some of the words you're going to hear. Your scanner is a camera. Scannography, scanograms, scanograms. I bring all these to you because those are the types of things, if you want to do some follow-up and do some of this yourself after you're done, and I got to admit, it is a lot of fun to do, then those are the types of things you may want to search for as you go through. Now, are a lot of people doing scannography? You betcha. This happens to be one little segment of scanograms that I picked off of a search off of Tumblr. And there are literally thousands and thousands of these different imageries, and you can see they're so diverse, from whether it's flowers or equipment like cameras, feathers, people's faces, all sorts of treasured types of documents all put together, potato that's got all sorts of growth on it and looks really withered. And you can see that people's imaginations are just running crazy with doing this type of thing. So what makes scannography unique? Well, first of all, it's fun. As I told you earlier, it made the top 100 ideas for photography because not only is it fun, it's educational, and you'll see this in activities. A lot of young people are getting involved in this because you have the opportunity to, one, utilize technology that's pretty readily available, and two, kind of unleash your creative powers without having to be a real, true artist. You just have to kind of be inspired. The second thing is it gives you a completely different perspective just because of the optics that are involved. Now, I don't want you to confuse this with the medical term of scannography, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But this is really, if you think about it, the logical successor of, remember the old Xerox where people used to put their face down and they would scan their faces or their hands or some other anatomy part? Well, that's really what this is, and that was back in the 60s when photocopying started. But the difference is that when you photocopy something, it's on paper. And it's doomed to a life of paper. But if you can digitize it, you actually have the opportunity then to let it live on into perpetuity, as well as be able to manipulate the images and have a lot of fun with it. And it's so much fun. So it marries really that art of digitization with creativity. Now, I'll give you a real quick history lesson, and I won't spend a lot on this, but this was what we would consider the first scanner. Now, it wasn't really a flatbed. It was a little different than that, but this was invented back in the 1860s by a guy by the name of Caselli, and I'll show you how this thing worked real simple, and it was taking advantage of being able to send things over a phone line that had just kind of come to popularity. And the way this thing kind of works, and let me get to my laser here, there we go, there was a pendulum down here, and it would swing back and forth, and as it did, It moved up here to this rocker arm that then moved over here, and they were actually able to reproduce or scan, so to speak, in an analog fashion, different types of writings and including pictures. So that's kind of the beginning of how this all came up and how it all got started, and it made it so that you could actually do something that was like 150 by 100 millimeters. So if there's 2-3 millimeters or 2-3 centimeters to a millimeter, that's going to be somewhere just a very small, less than a 4 by 6 photograph. But you could see that it was actually the precursor to where we got started in this whole business of scanning. Today's scanning, though, is completely different. The modern scanner actually came to fruition in 1974. And I don't know if anybody actually knows what this is about and how it got started, but I will tell you it didn't get started for the purpose that you think it is, that somebody said, we need a way to digitize documents so that we could send them around. Nope. Not at all. In fact, it was Raymond Kurzweil, who is still alive today as far as I have been able to determine, and he's actually turned into like a futurist. It's amazing some of the things that he's done, the books he's written and participated in. But back in 1974, he started working on this project, now hear this, as a device, a tabletop device, and actually the first one took the whole tabletop to help the blind. And what he wanted to do was actually create an image and then be able to turn it into a text-to-speech synthesizer. So he tried to marry in the optical character recognition, but in the process of doing it, he created this tool. And this is how our scanners, our flatbed scanners, work today. First of all, you have to have a light source, all right? And then you have, and in this case, this says document, but in our case of scannograms, we would be working with some sort of object, and you have this glass platen that is between us and this movable light source. So now what happens is we come along and we move the light source along the line, and with it we keep a fixed distance between that and a mirror, and it moves. And so what happens, we use reflective light, just like what we're seeing, only this time we're using artificial light source. It bounces up, it gets the document, or in this case our object, and then bounces back to this mirror and bounces to another device and moves down to what Kurzweil had come up with was this CCD. And the CCD was the device that took those visible light rays and turned them and captured them into a digital image. So this charge coupling device, and inside you kind of can see some of these components. There's usually some sort of circuit board, there's a mirror system in here, there's a light source, and you see that in this case the object stays still and the light source moves. The difference when we deal with automatic document feeders, the light source stays still and the object moves through it. So there's a little bit of history about the flatbeds. And again, remember, we're using reflective light. So we need to take a few minutes and nail down a couple other kinds of topics when we're dealing with this world of scanograms and scannography. So I'm going to, first of all, bring up the fact you heard it mentioned about a medical scanogram. Now, my background happens to be in radiology, and I actually used to do images just like this many times on patients. And what would happen is we would have 3 14 by 17 films stacked in together, one on top of the other, and we would take a photograph, or an x-ray actually, of the patient, and we would use these, and you can kind of see down here, down at the bottom, this ankle area here, a different alignment. We would use it for measuring the length of legs if they weren't in the same length, if there was going to be some sort of orthopedic type of intervention to try and help that patient so that they could walk a little bit more effectively. We would also use it up here in the hip area so that we could make sure that the pelvis sat straight. And you can see here, the only difference here in leg length is that we got the knee space going right here, and then just a little bit of difference here. So that is really the process that all of our scanograms that we think about today were. And if you look at the date of this article, you'll see that that was written in the journal in 1966. So it took us a number of years to get from this type of medical world into having the technologies available for us to use in the kind of world that we live in now, where actually everyone can take advantage of this. So when you do a scanogram, you see such detail, and the reason why is because, as you can notice, there's such a short focal distance between that and the object, and it's right there, and it presses right on there, and you can actually pick up detail that is incredible, depending on the resolution and some of your scanner settings. Now, when did our scanography appear on the scene? We talked about medical scanography starting up somewhere around 1966. But it was back in the early 70s when Sonia Landy Sheridan actually had a internship at where I used to work was 3M, and that's how I got my involvement with the kind of the commercial side of imaging. And she was studying, they happened to come out with what they called the CNC, and that was the first color copier. Well, she got a grant, and she quickly realized, as you can see here, she quickly realized that you could replicate not only paper and different objects in color, you could replicate objects. And so she began a life's work, and she actually had her artwork, she turned this into artwork in the numerous exhibits around some of the world's famous art galleries during that early time. Just a quick side note about this, 3M came up with a second version, and they called it the CNC2. The CNC1 actually did just everything on a 1-to-1 ratio. So whatever you did, it was the same size. But the CNC2 actually able to blow things up. Now, this is technology we take for advantage today and say, oh gosh, every copier machine can blow an object up. Well, the CNC2 was the very first one that could do that in color, and you'll see if you do a little bit more research on Sonia Sheridan, she would actually lay out in whole body parts of people, and they would blow them up, and that's where she really became famous with her artwork when it went on display. So it's kind of an interesting story, and they actually came out of this in 1974. So you can see it was almost, 8 years after medical scanography came out that we started utilizing it in this format for body parts, only not using radiation, but using just merely photographing body parts and turning them into art. And you can see she was an image scientist. She was not so much an artist, although there's a lot of creativity in the work that she did. She was actually studying the science of digitizing, or at least in this case, transferring an image from an analog format onto paper. Here's a good example of some of the things that you can do very simply. And the reason that scanography is so cool, because first of all, when you look at it, these two photographs, when you look at them, are exactly the same. You can see the fine rib detail on here. You can see all the different parts of the buds. You can see all the little different types of accessory types of vines or additional plants that come through there. But then with a little magic of editing the image itself digitally, I can do a reversal, and I can take the background out. I can change the coloration. So much opportunity for you when you go along as dealing with these types of images as versus to some of the things that you'll see in photography. So let's talk about that a little bit. So What makes the difference between a photocopier with and this happens to be a photocopier with a feeder on it, and actually the flatbed that we've been talking about in these examples of scannograms? Well, first of all, most of your copiers today are actually digitizing devices, and they can scan as well. But what we don't really think about that much is that the scanning device is up in the area of the lid. So you place the document up into the chute, they circle around, and they're digitized here and then shot back out into the exit tray. This part of the device is the photo part. This is still taking a photograph of the picture and placing it onto paper. As opposed to in our scanning example here with the scanner, we have a lid that just merely holds the light and keeps the ambient light out, and the digitization process will have a bar of light that travels across the length of that and does that process of bouncing it into the camera and then to that charge coupling device, which takes that light and divides it up into a digital signal. And we use 3 channels typically. We typically use the red, the blue, and the green. So there's a couple of things that are different. First of all, just how they're constructed, right? And how they lend themselves to manipulation, right? And we can adjust the resolution so much more in a digital scanner so that you can get a really unique capabilities that you don't necessarily have in some of the copying machines, and especially when the scanning device is just right here. Now, we've talked a little bit about it. There is a very small, limited depth of field, and that's because we're only really expecting, these were built to expect the document or the photograph to lay flat on the platen, and they didn't need to get a big depth of field. So let's take some considerations about that particular part of the equipment, and what we're going to do here is we're going to look at some of the considerations when you're dealing for scannography. And when we deal with this, we're talking about a flatbed. First of all, we need to understand our very first part is that scannography is exceeding the original purpose for our flatbed, which lends me to tell you we need to take some care. That platen can be scratched, that glass platen. So there's a number of different ways you can deal with that. You can get another piece of glass and put over it. I recommend a type of a museum type of glass that's an anti-glare and anti-reflection type of glass. But you can, there's a number of people that just use, when they're dealing with this, they use a transparency and place it on the platen. So I'll leave it to you as you go through your practice of scannography what you want to do, but you do want to take care of your flatbed. Now, the other thing you have to be careful about is, right, this thing is a piece of glass suspended between some supports, and if you put too much weight to that favorite rock that you want to digitize and turn into something of a scanogram that you can do all sorts of things with, you're going to have to be a little careful with that, right? So that the weight of it doesn't crack the platen. Now, there's all sorts of scanograms being done with liquids and different types of objects. So I suggest, and when we've done it, we want to, first of all, protect the liquid part. If no matter what scanner you have, the platen, there's actually a edge around it that it is possible for liquid to flow in and up underneath, or to dirt to get up underneath it. In fact, even in the most pristine situations, you may wind up with that type of thing when you're just doing your photograph. So we want to take good care of our scanner, and the best way to do that is to try and get that dust and those particles off, unless that's one of the effects you're trying to reach. And if you're going to do that, I'll show you a great way to fix your scanner so you won't have that problem. Another thing is you want to try to use the highest resolution that's desirable, and I like to output them into an uncompressed TIFF format so that if I want to do any kind of manipulation, I'm not actually manipulating a JPEG, which can actually diminish some of its quality, but because I know I'm going to be doing manipulation, I'll probably put it out in a TIFF format. Now use the largest flatbed size that you have available. There are multiple different sizes, and I won't spend a lot of time on that, but remember, the bigger the size, the more possibilities of coming over here and breaking your plat if you put too much weight in the middle. So be careful, you know, if you're just doing small objects and you've got an A3, that's great, but if they're really heavy objects, even though they're small and you place them in there, you run a better chance because you just have a greater suspension or depth or length of glass that's being suspended. Now, the other thing you want to do is you want to consider having additional light sources available. And what I mean by that is you can do all sorts of things with the lighting. And you can also do things with alternate backdrops. So you can have different kinds of cloths, or you can use different types of fabrics, different types of papers, different colors, and you can create as much as you want. You're really only limited by your imagination. So you want to have some of those available. And my recommendation is that you secure your flatbed so that when you're, especially if you're using motion, against motion, so when you're moving, your scanner is scanning one way and you're moving it the other way, then you want to make sure that you don't actually move the physical device, the scanning bed, and then you're going to get unwanted movement or unintended distortion. So this is what some of these things look like. Here is Marsha Tudor, and we'll talk a little bit more about this information and some great resources that we have available in her lab. And she's doing some flowers, and you can see I like to take the back off of my scanner. If hinged, you can do that by just really unscrewing it. If you have certain kinds of scanners, those lids actually lift up and lift off, and then you can scan. But you can see over here, she's got something, it looks like she's got some protection around the edges here, and you can see she's working with a flower, and so she's got all sorts of workspace here, and if you got a bigger picture of this, you actually see some other things on the side here where she's got different tools and to help prop things up. Now, my favorite in the world of scannography is when you use liquids and paints and things. And so here we are with Jamie Ruiz, and man, Jamie has got some great techniques and specializes in liquids. And so here you can see that this scanner has probably seen a few better days in its life. But look what they've done. They've taken some tape and they've plastered it all around here so that it makes a impenetrable barrier so it won't actually seep down up underneath the platen, and then you've got all sorts of other issues. Doesn't look like Jamie's too concerned about, though, the back or any of that. It's just all kind of this area here. And, of course, if you're going to work with liquids, I always recommend that on the control panel you take a piece of cellophane or saran wrap or something and place it on the front just in case that spills over so that you can lift it up. Ironically, Jamie built a box, and you're going to see another box in a few minutes that's an amazing tool as well. And this box has a protective layer down below that they don't mind scratching. It actually has a lid. That lid is so that you can actually have like chemical reactions going on and take scannograms using things like chemical reactions. You know, you put a few crystals of Mentos Mint and a Coca-Cola, and you've got all sorts of fizzing going on, and you activate your scanner, as well as all sorts of different kind of liquids. We featured in our newsletter not long ago a gentleman who actually had made whole planetary scenes, outer space scenes, by just doing this type of thing. And here's in a contained box. So again, the scanner remains pristine. So how you set this up is obviously up to you, but you can see a number of the different tools that are available. I personally, when we're doing scannography, we like to keep our blower from DataVac available, and it blow the area off so that we make sure that it's clean, and any object that we're going to do, if it's a dry object like a flower or any kind of plant or a rock or any types of things like that, we blow that so that the dust kind of reduces the dust. We blow it before we actually place it on the scanner. But you have all sorts of different kinds of fun tools that are available for you. Now just imagine if you had a website and your business was selling fruit and you were able to put this type of image on there. You can now begin to see, look at that detail of those berries and all the intricate components of it. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but just can you imagine being able to have that image, which probably shouldn't be taught in any other format than using Scannography. And we'll show you how that works in just a few minutes. But before we do, we want to talk about shadows and sharpness. Now, when you scan, there are three things that we want to think about when we're doing Scannography. So first of all, we have our light source. And we talked about our light source, and our light source will sometimes be bigger than the object that we're scanning, or at least small components of it. So these three areas are umbra, penumbra, and antumbra. And I'll explain each one of them, and you can see there's a sample. First of all, let's talk about the umbra part. The umbra is the area of the most exact sharpness. And what I mean by that is the light comes across, and you'll remember that there's glass here, right, when we're doing scanning. And so the light bounces back into our mirror and then is recorded. But if you'll see, it's very crisp and blocks all light from traveling through, assuming it's completely opaque. If not, it may allow some light to pass through here. But this area of sharpness is umbra. Now, our light source, especially as it moves along, is going to create some other effects with shadows. And that's called the penumbra and the antumbra. So let's talk about the penumbra next. And that's the area of unsharpness around the edge, because remember, our glass is down along behind it, and the light's going to bounce back, and as it does, we're going to get these areas around the edge, and they can create what's known as an unclear area or an unclear shadow around the exact object. And finally, there's one other kind of shadowing and light that we need to think about when we deal with Scannography, and that's what happens when these lights converge, these two light paths. And the way this works is, this is the greatest angle and the least angle, as well as the greatest and the least here that they're showing. So anything beyond here becomes penumbra, and anything behind here is umbra. But what happens when that light reaches a point, because we've taken the back off the scanner, let's say, and reaches a point where it actually shoots off and crosses, and it becomes larger than our original object. If there's any reflection back on that, then you're going to wind up getting this antumbra, and you can see then it's a ring all the way around, because the object is smaller than actually the backscatter. So that's why when we talk about Scannography, we talk about turning off the lights to try to eliminate the antumbra and minimize the penumbra and maximize the umbra, or adding extra light in to cause a different type of effect or a different kind of feedback than what would naturally occur with shadows. So this is a really interesting concept, because you can also incur some of this with photos and different types of treasured documents that have things on them that have a little depth. You can also effectively get this umbra and penumbra. Not so much the antumbra, but you can get the penumbra and the umbra part. I remember this kind of from the standpoint of an umbrella. If you stand underneath an umbrella, you're going to stay dry, but all the stuff around you is kind of like the penumbra. So imagine standing on a concrete, it's raining, and you look down and it's sprinkling, and you look down underneath, you're perfectly dry, the concrete's dry, but all around you spacklings and these edge effects. Now, here's the thing. We can use these edge effects to our advantage, to help us. Now, this is an interesting scanogram. I'll leave you to kind of go through all the different components. I'm just going to show it to you for the purposes, number one, of our shadowing, and number two, this is what's known as the empty pocket project. And if you can kind of see what was in their pocket, you kind of get an idea of where they found the subject, or anyways, moving on to that, you can see here this area of very close sharpness where like this $20 bill is laying flat on there. But as you move across, right, and there's becomes that field of depth, it gets a little blurrier. But then you also will see shadows around all these different components, and that's the penumbra part of it bouncing back. They turn the lights off, so they've removed that kind of external ambient light, so the penumbra isn't as much of a detail. But if you look at these really small pieces here, and if you were to blow this up, you'd be able to see that even much closer. And so as you're looking through your objects and scanning things, you're going to want to take into consideration this area of really close sharpness, and then these areas of unsharpness, and as well as the shadowing effects all the way through there. And the empty project was really amazing. There's all sorts of different types of things. It's amazing what people carry in their pockets. And so you can have a lot of fun with that. So ready, set, scan. Let's look at this just a little bit more. First of all, we've taken our precautions to protect our equipment. And you want to position the objects onto the flatbed, and then you launch your scanning application, right? If you want a black background, you turn the lights off. You're going to leave the top up, you turn the lights off, and you want to make sure that you adjust your monitor, right? Because that monitor light can serve as kind of extraneous light that can, now you can use that to an effect if you'd like, but you can remove that type of ambient lighting and get that really strong black background. Or you can actually, as I said, use lights and all sorts of different colors if you like. You hit that scan button, and if you have ever worked with Scannography, I will tell you, it's not a one and done. You'll look at it and go, oh, I really want to move this, or this will look better this way. So I strongly recommend, and you'll see a lot of these when you're going through, and I'll show you, point it out to you in a couple other of the images that we have in our presentation today. You'll see that these images have a system where you want to number them or get some sort of identifier with them so that you'll have multiple versions over and over again. And it just makes it simpler for you as you're working through it. If you have a system and you hit the scan button and say, oh, I want to move this a little bit, or I want to do that again, you have a way to kind of chronologically go through that with your naming scheme. And then after that, we're off to our digital imaging with our photo editor and the application, and we can do all sorts of enhancements and characteristics. It's really that simple. We talked about Tumblr, but look at this. These are scannograms, Scannography for sale. You got it. Thousands of them on Etsy. Now, Etsy's known for its craftiness and this type of thing. And look at this. Somebody put a flower on there and it's asking 20 bucks for the print. $14 for this magnolia. Here's just some leaves, right? Some fig leaves and some figs. And you can see all sorts of different creative things coming out. And can you just imagine on the other side being able to offer this unique art to someone never going to be created again, and yet this kind of uniqueness that you just can't get with photography. So this is a good example. So if you need more ideas, jump out to Etsy and you'll just be simply amazed at what you can do with Scannography. So maybe we've piqued your interest. I hope we have. The art of scanning and turning it into art, there's a fantastic resource. I encourage you to look up scannography.org. And in there, you'll notice there's techniques and artists and links and materials and all sorts of things you would be able to use to help you along. It's not a hard process, and we have these boxes just laying around, oftentimes in a closet somewhere, not utilized as much as they should be. And here's the opportunity to get it out and play with it a little bit. And who knows, you may have some great artistic, creative function just pouring and bubbling out of you just because you marry it with a little of technology. And if you're already gifted in that way, then all the better for you. This Marty Klein, this gentleman creates things called Scandalous. Now, scannulas are repeating patterns. So if you look here, this is actually a scanogram as a backdrop for a web page, right? And you'll see this repeating pattern over and over again. And those repeating patterns can be small repeats or larger repeats. Jamie Ruiz, we've seen Jamie's scanners and how they are set up. And Jamie specializes in liquids. And when I talk about that, I talk about fluids that actually flow. Meanwhile, Bex Wild, who all of Bex's information is down here as well with a link, I think a little bit further on, you'll actually, Bex does liquids, only she does it in a solid state or ice. So what she'll do is she'll actually take those images, take the object, freeze them into ice cubes, or place them into, say, bottles and that type of thing to get this kind of really weird effect, and then digitize them. Jeff Mahalo does a 3-pass method. Now, some scanning devices in software will allow you to scan not just one time, not a single pass, but you can scan over and over again. So in the explanations of Jeff, they actually describe a 3-pass method where we can go through and pass it again. And as you do, you get just a richer and more succinct imagery that is developed out of that. And then Chris Stabler does this process of layering. So just imagine like those plants we saw with the leaves and then the little flowering shoots behind it. So how you layer things. All sorts of other different ideas, but these are some of the main techniques: repeating patterns, liquids, techniques on scanning and enhancing the imagery, as well as this layering technique, all here on Scannography.org. I would point out to you that I have a friend that actually, when I told him I did scanning, he said, "Oh yeah, we use scanning." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, we make circuit boards." I said, "No joke." He said, "Yeah." And so you can see here that this person off of Flickr utilized, and there was a RAD controller 1 and a RAD controller 2, and you get the idea. So that's the numbering scheme. But you can see all the detail, the close detail, the circuitry, and what they would literally do is they would make these really expensive boards, and they would scan them. They would digitize them with a photo scanner, flatbed, and then they would be able to go through very quickly, blow this up, and make sure that they had a good solder and a good connection from point A to point B, and that was part of their quality control. It was a whole business, and they had a company that came in with a flatbed scanner and actually did their boards for them. They came in once a week, and they would do all these prototype boards for them before they went to full production. In this case, this is just artwork and all the unique lines and the different characteristics of the back of a board. So again, Scannography, both as business as well as art. And here's another one. This is a blanket, and I bring this up for a couple of reasons. This is, if you'll see here, we've got some artifacts in here, but they're actually, this was a blanket, and you can actually see the detail, not only of the different fibers, but you can also see some of the particulate matter that's in here as well. But what will happen is we can cut out a piece of that, and you can actually recreate that over and over again to get you a very unique characteristic and imagery so that you can use it for a website or that type of thing for a backdrop. Now, when I talk about doing textures and fibers, if you've ever been familiar or ever used LinkedIn, or you've used something like lynda.com, which is now owned by LinkedIn, they have a whole series. They got a ton of videos and training programs on scanning, but they have a whole series on making patterns with scanned fabric swatches. No joke, right? And it goes on and on. It just goes forever as you go through and you look at some of the different patterns and how they do that. It goes all the way from the conception of this, and then as you digitize the image, as you image the different patterns and the different characteristics of these, and then what you can do with them afterwards, and mostly for replication in the design world. But it's a great presentation, so if you have opportunity to go on lynda.com, if you're a member of LinkedIn, you can certainly do that and have this chance to take this course And the section actually about scanning is only about 3 sections and takes about 20 minutes to go through. So again, here is high technology company like lynda.com, LinkedIn, offering courses on scanning things with a flatbed. But if you haven't met Nathaniel Stern when you deal with scannography, let me introduce you to a scanographer extraordinaire. Actually, Nathaniel started this project when he was in school, and he went on to create this and a whole bunch of other different types of artistic work. But what Nathaniel did was he actually, and this is one of his scanners right here, he took a flatbed and integrated in the computer to it and created a number of different devices. So I'll kind of point them out to you. He actually began to get fascinated. First of all, he did all sorts of different types of objects, but he began to get fascinated with water and the effects of water, and he's got some fantastic scanograms of these water lilies and the different, it's called rippling waters. It's a fantastic thing. And you'll see he's created a wooden cart underneath there, has bolted his flatbed, and then on top he's got his computer, and he's walking through, wading through a pond, and he's taking scans as he goes through. Here he is in an ocean estuary environment, again, doing the same type of thing, out in the elements. Here he's working on the development of a scanner. This is a picture of him when he's in Dublin, and you can see he's totally portable with this thing. He goes through, he runs it on a battery, he's got a little small computer that runs it, and he just literally goes so portable. And his last endeavor is fantastic. I encourage you to jump over to his site here called nathanielstern.com, Artwork Compressionism, and take a look at the video. Nathaniel got so interested in scanography that he created, and there's a video there that's on YouTube that you can play, that will walk you through the whole process where he created, you got it, a waterproof scanography unit. He took his battery-operated device with the computer, he sealed it in what he thought was going to be a waterproof environment. I am not going to ruin the story because in the end, the leaking water actually creates a really kind of cool effect. And then he went diving in the ocean on a coral reef and scanned the coral underwater. Fantastic. Now, I don't know that you're going to actually get that crazy with your scanography, but if you do, follow Nathaniel Stern, and he will inspire you beyond all belief. But I've told you that there were some business opportunities, so I'm not going to part without sharing with you at least a few of them. I've identified 5 of them where I have been able to determine that people are actually doing scanography and getting paid for it. So in that vein, sounds like a business to me. The first one is scanner art. The next one is website content. The third one is numismatics. The fourth one is home decor, and the fifth one is publishing. So let's look at them just a little bit in detail, each one. I'll leave you to dive into it in full detail, depending on your level of interest. But let's take the scanner art. There is a handout that's available that you can download. It will also be on our website where we post up the videos on this. And you're going to be able to see a whole article that was put together about all of the elements that you see here were done using scanography. And they actually have full-blown art exhibits and art displays, and people pay big money for this type of creativity. First of all, it's all original, it's all unique, and it is so beautiful because you get kind of so many different variations and different kinds of colors. So scanner art is one of those business opportunities. Another is website content. We've used this part of scanography. Actually, we started this by, first of all, taking and going down to an arts and crafts shop, and we bought some backgrounds, some 12 by 12 scrapbook backgrounds, and we scanned them, and I looked, wow, these are really cool. And then all of a sudden I realized, well, you know, these would make great backgrounds for our website. No one would be able to ever claim that they have one just like it, and it makes us very unique. If you go to a site like Wix.com, which is a way for you to start up and build a site kind of real quickly, one of the things they talk about is, you got it, taking that weird machine laying in some dark corner of the office called the flatbed scanner and doing backgrounds. And so you can see, here's somebody that's taken a whole array of menagerie of different objects, put them on there, and what a cool background, unique just to themselves. And then we showed you the raspberry one. Imagine if you're doing foods or you're doing collections of jewelry, all these kinds of unique characteristics depending on the type of business that you're running. So if you're so encouraged, what a great opportunity to take your technology and turn it into something that is actually sellable, and people can get something so unique. And it's not like going to stock photography where you're going to run into an object that is somebody else has downloaded and purchased as well. Another one is coins. John Winter is an interesting guy, and here he's actually talking about scanning and simple scanning and the detail on what you can do with coins. So maybe you've got that coin shop down the corner and you say, how would you like to display all your coins on the website in a very unique way? Great opportunities either for fun or for business in order for you to take advantage of the clarity of this really close contact and that short focal distance and focal focus, and be able to convert it into an opportunity to not only just have it for fun, but also to sell it. Another one is Redouble, and Redbubble. There are a number of types of things for home decor. I am not going to dive into everything for it, but I will tell you that there was home decor with Scannography. These happen to be pillows, but there was home decor for pillows, candles, blankets, lamps, shades, pillowcases, and whole bedspreads, as well as dining ware, drinkware, refrigerator magnets, some of those types of things, all available for Scannography. So can you imagine having a client where you're dealing with them and you say, you know, this would make a very unique object, something nobody's ever had, and let's make a set of coasters with this object, not picture, object. So again, something near and dear to them that they would like to possibly hold for posterity, and the value of that story behind that object, and convert it into something that's a pillowcase sitting on a couch, or a coaster, or a mug, or whatever. And finally, there's publishing. There are a number of books about publishing. I'm going to bring up about Scannography that have been published. I'm just going to bring up my favorite one. David was absolutely right. We when we can't get lunch, we all just open up our sandwiches book. This actually started from a gentleman who went out and took his girlfriend. He was a kind of a designer, artist kind of guy, and he went out to Brooklyn and he got a sandwich, and it was cut in half, and he took his girlfriend's flatbed and scanned half the sandwich. Now he gets to eat them when they're all done. He then went on and did that every day for a year. Every kind of sandwich. And yes, you're right, this is pastrami on rye with some cheese, just to let you know. He went on to publish a book. We're giving away 2 copies of them. It's called Sandwiches, and it is one of those books that you will just talk about forever and ever, because there's not a whole lot of people that have seen. We talk about taking pictures of our phone with our mobile phones and mobile devices. Nothing like this when you scan your sandwich. And he's had a lot of fun with it, and he's moved on to become part of an advertising agency and all sorts of design. You can find Scannography everywhere. It's all over. This is a collection that was just picked up from HiveMiner, and there's thousands of these images here. And so it doesn't really matter whether it's your clothes and your laundry that you're scanning, or your jewelry, or Coca-Cola cans, shards of plastic, empty pockets, or it's a good-looking dude just trying to scare you to death. But whatever that is, you can try it on that flatbed, and you will be creating Scannography. So we've got a few more minutes before the end of our session. I'm going to go to the questions and see if there are any questions here. And let's see. Yes, so there's a question here that says, when you're doing Scannography, do you have to be concerned about copyright stuff? Yes, the answer is true. You do. So be careful when you do scanograms. So kind of the everyday common objects, obviously plants and flora, that type of thing. You're perfectly fine with, but make sure that you're not out taking something that is just like in photographs, dealing with the copyright sessions. Okay, any other questions here? Okay, yeah, so there's one other one. What resolution? I would strongly urge you when you're scanning in Scannography that you deal with the highest resolution that you feel comfortable with, and also probably as important is that format that you want to go with, because you are going to definitely be working in a manner that goes to probably doing digital manipulation of that image. So something like that may be important if you expect to hold its integrity. All right. Well, David, are there any other questions? I don't see anything else.
I did see one pop up that mentioned, it says when you're looking at using cover sheets to protect the glass, is it possible, depending on the cover sheet, that you would actually be hurting the outcome of the image? Or should you be looking for particular cover sheets to help with that process?
So that's a great question. There's actually a whole process of using saran wrap and giving it that bubbly effect, so they're actually using it to distort the image. So it would depend on the quality that you're looking for. Obviously, if you're really looking for really tight quality and you want, no fingerprints, no dust and that type of thing on it, you would want to use a thin sheet of glass or a thin, as translucent of a material as you possibly can. I mentioned the museum type of glass that won't reflect or bounce any additional light on. It does raise, you don't want it to be too thick because it does raise that distance between the area of focus and moves the object a little farther away from it, so you can not get quite as much detail. There are some really good quality covers that you can buy on something like archival methods and that type of thing that are used for protecting an object, that are good for using to protect your scanner. Again, though, you may want to tape that down around the edges so that we don't get any dust or particulate matter up underneath. So I hope that answered that question.
Yeah.
All right. Well, how much fun was that? It's a little different look at how you may think about using your scanner and what you may be doing with it to create artwork or even income. I want to make sure that everybody knows that we are giving away 2 of the Scanwiches books. So answer the question that you want to be included in the giveaway this month when you answer the survey, either at the end or in the follow-up email that you will get tomorrow. We'll have this posted up online as well. So I hope that everybody has enjoyed this topic, and next month we're going to talk about peeling back the covers and looking at photo metadata. And we're going to include something for both everyone from the beginner to the expert. So we're going to invite you to join us then. Again, there'll be an invitation in the follow-up email. So thank you for joining us at this presentation. I hope that we get a whole bunch of different kinds of scanograms, and let us know if you do that. If you have any other questions, feel free to give us a call at IOTrack, and any of our imaging professionals would love to have a chance to work with you, whether it's about this type of scanning or any other. So thank you, and thanks, David, so much for allowing me to be in Atlanta today and you back at our home office.
All right. No, thank you so much for the presentation.